I am Daniel Likus, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 4 today. I have my feature author of the month of August. He is award-winning author and no other than Mr. Douglas Burton.
Thanks, Daniel. I appreciate the intro.
Yes! Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Douglas, and can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Douglas A. Burton, and I'm an award-winning author. I wrote my first book a couple years back. It was a Byzantine historical fiction novel about the Byzantine Empress Theodora. And while writing that, I ran into some conflicts in structuring the story around the hero's journey, which led me to a massive 4-year journey of my own detailing heroine-centric novels, and that's the heart of the book that came out this year called The Heroine's Labyrinth, which is an alternative to the hero's journey.
Thank you for sharing your talent, Mr. Douglas. Thank you so much. And what inspired you to become an author?
Well, I'm a naturally creative person, and I think most people who are creative just have an urge to create. Whether and there's a spectrum of things you could do. I was attracted to art when I was younger. I was also attracted to music, but really, I fell in love with writing because writing gives you a chance to be very specific, and that kind of specificity can be, challenging if you're trying to describe very complex things, emotional states and conditions as a person or a human being. So, putting it together in a coherent way became like a real passion of mine. And I finally was able to put it all together for that first novel. And I think every writer out there knows when you can finally finish the project, you've accomplished something.
Yes, for sure. So, can you tell us about your writing process?
Yeah, so for a long time, when you're younger, you write what you think is cool, and there are usually several chapters. Then maybe you stop writing because you lose track of the structure. There's no real clear cut beginning, middle, and end. And then there's a lot of efforts at writing short stories and joining writers groups. So once I developed a serious approach to what I was going to do in terms of putting together an actual story, um, music became a big thing. I often listen to soundtrack music, and it has the effect of creating spontaneous ideas in the background. I might have like a scene planned out in my head, and while listening to different music, sometimes unexpected ideas pop in there and unexpected scenarios or character moments, and pretty soon the spontaneous factor that the music helps to deliver creates something that I had not planned on, and that is the most exciting part. And then it's up to you to catch all of it and put it down into words, and that is a very fun process.
Very well said, Mr. Douglas. Yay! Very well said.
Thank
So,
you.
how do you develop your characters and plot lines?
Well, believe it or not, a lot of it has to do with world building, I think, initially. I think it's important to understand who your characters are in terms of the world they live in. And then I start to examine my characters in terms of their relationships, the relationships to the world, the relationships to the people around them, their relationships to the ideas of that world. And then once you start adding other characters into a scene, they come from something. They're part of a functional world. So there's going to be certain relationships there just in between the characters, and sometimes understanding the relationship between the two characters, for example, or their world or their setting drives the writing. Just as the writer, you are trying to capture and explain some of that, and not just laying it all out in detail, but through dialogue. You're giving the reader clues, and you're demonstrating as an author, hopefully, that you have command of these relationships and what's at stake and what's going on. And if you could do that, a lot of these scenes start to drive the story on their own, and it's up to the author to fine tune it and get that exactly right, to the point where you're ready to move on to the next chapter.
Yes. So, what challenges have you faced in your writing career?
I think a lot of the challenges I face are similar for a lot of writers. It's writing is not something you can do quickly, so it is time intensive. So you have to commit to pouring yourself and your subconscious into these worlds that you're writing about. And I'm married, I have kids. There's a lot of baseball tournaments, a lot of baseball practice, and family life. And then, of course, you have a career, a job that you're working at. So, the real challenge is to find time and then commit to a schedule that allows you to write in a focused, consistent manner. I think that's the biggest challenge of them all.
Yes, consistency. So, how do you handle
Consistency.
writer block or writer's block?
Yeah, that the writer's block for me, I think it's different for everybody. Writer's block for me, I kind of get into a point where I know what I want to write next. So I can actually skip long periods of time with the story on pause. I don't lose interest in it. It doesn't go away. It's right there, ready for me. But the challenge is to not have to hit pause, right? You want to be able to sit down on a consistent basis day after day and follow through on what you're working on. I think that's when you're at your best. And I do believe, it's funny, I read this in a Stephen King book a long time ago, his famous book on writing. He talks about the idea of a muse and how, some people think it's this magical, beautiful thing. And he's like, nope, it's like a guy who chomps on a cigar in a basement, and you go into that basement and he just stares at you, and your job is to sit there and write. And I think that is exactly what it's like. So you just have to train yourself to go into that basement as often as possible. And by doing that, your mind does pick up cues and can operate full force as a writer.
Yes. So, what authors or books have influenced your writing?
Well, there's, oh God, so many. There's so many because I think a lot of boys in my generation started with, your typical like Lord of the Rings, right? The Lord of the
Yes.
Rings, that's one of the great fantasy stories of all time. And that captures your imagination pretty thoroughly. The Hobbit, when I was a little boy, my mom read The Hobbit to myself and my sister. And of course, while you're sitting there, you're like, man, what could I come up with, right? What could I write about? And then, of course, there's science fiction. Arthur C. Clarke, 2001, A Space Odyssey. I read that early on. So I always assumed I was going to write fantasy or science fiction. That's really what I assumed I would write. But as I got older and developed a real love of the Byzantine Empire and that historical period, I realized I really wanted to write a book that takes, or actually a series of books that takes place in that historical period. And there's even there's other compelling reasons for that. The Byzantine Empire is oddly like blacked out of history. Most people know very little about it. You spend most of your time, I think, in American schools learning about the Western Roman Empire that occupies modern day Europe and Italy. The Mediterranean area there. But the Byzantine Empire is divorced of Europe after the 5th century, and it's a Christian empire. It's very, very different from the pagan Rome of antiquity. And because once I discovered that there's very little known about this, it became like a special passion to write something about a place and a period that few people have read about and know little about. And like, for example, think of a movie that takes place in the Byzantine Empire. There's very few, and
Yes.
sometimes people can't even name one. They're so rare. And this is an empire that occupies Greece and modern day Turkey, like Egypt. It's not unfamiliar to I guess Western schools. and it lasted 1,100 years. It's one of the longer standing empires. So to me, that this alternative urge to share my like what feels like a discovery of this like hidden period of history became part of the reason behind the passion just to write about it.
Yes. So how do you approach research process of your books?
So I have a lot of books. You can see behind me, those two rows right behind me are all Byzantine books, some of them quite rare. One of them in particular only comes out of a small press from Australia. And these books aren't cheap. But if you want the goods, if you want to know what really is going on in a specific way, those are the books. So what I like to do is I like to take all pressure off myself and just sit down and read the history books. And, I'll make highlights and notes in the margin and circle things and star things as I go that I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. And it happens a lot. So at some point, when you read enough of the history and you read different takes on the same events, you start to develop a fully functional world in your head of different relationships between historical figures, where they were, what their rank and position was in society during different years. And as you start to chart all of this and record all of this, you can start to see as a novelist where this drama might come from. And it might be something that no one's thought of yet. And especially with the Byzantine Empire, where there's such little out there, there's a real opportunity to tell a very large story that no one's ever heard before, that is anchored into the historical account and delivers, hopefully, what feels like an epic story that really happened. And that's the key. That really happened,
Yes, for sure. So how do you categorize your writing?
I'm sorry, say that again. You cut out for 1 second.
How do you categorize your writing?
So, I categorize. So I do it chronologically first because a lot of events you don't want to make the mistake of telling something out of order or making because getting the order right is very important because it tells you something about the development of characters. If a character is a bodyguard for a prominent person in this year and then goes on to become a general the next year, well, that's important to know because you get an idea of that character's progression in this society. So I do it chronologically, and then I do it by character. So I compile all my notes on each character, and then I start doing some world building notes, like if there's specific offices or ranks or titles. I like to get that down because it's good to know those. And then sometimes you got to translate them because especially with the Byzantine Empire, should I put the title in Greek, which no one's ever heard of before, or very few people have heard of, I would say, in the mainstream? Or should I translate it to English and give it what ends up being a pretty cool title when you translate it to English in some cases? So you have to make all of these decisions in terms of how you're going to deliver this world and build it out. And then I take another step and I try to figure out the power bases. Like for the Byzantine Empire, for example, the churches. There was almost a civil war amongst Christian churches at the time, and some of the religions are extinct today. So now, you're writing about a religion that very few people in the mainstream have even heard of. So you have to deliver that in a way that's easy to understand and feels good to your readers when they're going through. So. And I believe all of that lends itself to what I call functionality, a functional world where the characters, the power bases, the buildings, all of it interplays together in a way that feels natural, like this world existed. And so I do start by categorizing them, and then I think it's the author's job to sit back and synthesize these different categories and let something come to life in your imagination that you could imagine watching, if it was on TV, or you could imagine reading about and being like, "Oh man, this is totally interesting." You got to deliver that. Say that again.
Before we go on, I want to shout out my ranking tops for the last 30 days because in Jordan I got 40 on the Apple chart, Mexico, Thailand, Philippines, Egypt, Tanzania, Moldova, United
Oh,
Kingdom,
wow.
Norway, South Africa, and a lot more. Thank you so much for supporting this podcast because this podcast is created to empower writers, authors all over the world, like Mr. Douglas A. Burton.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Douglas, what
Yes, sir.
advice you can share to our aspiring writers out there?
Well, to take it seriously, take it seriously. It's easy to just say I'm going to write every day and not really go for it. You really have to set your mind right. I would say it's also very important to learn grammar, punctuation, and the rules of the language you're writing in, because when I was a kid, I believed that those were very annoying things, like math. I did not like learning those things. However, when it comes to writing, it's about clarity. If you learn those rules, your writing will become clear, and there's a massive power to clarity in writing, especially if you're writing a story for people. So take it seriously, take yourself seriously, and do write every day, but with purpose. I would say that's the key.
Yes, and stop procrastinating, people. If you have the passion of writing, go, go, go. Write, 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 and share to the world. Who knows? You will become award-winning author like Mr. Douglas A. Burton. So, can you share a memorable moment from your writing career?
Whew, yeah, well, boy, a memorable moment from the writing. God, there's so many. Yeah, I guess one thing that I thought was a very memorable moment, and this is good for other writers to hear about, is so I was writing the historical novel about Byzantine Empress Theodora, and I found out she has a daughter, like this little child, and as a writer, it was so frustrating, almost annoying, because I was like, I don't have any plan for this character. I almost wanted to pretend that the daughter didn't exist, right? I just wished it'd be easier on me if the daughter wasn't there. I had this idea in mind. And while working with writers groups, it was amazing how many writers were kept asking about Theodora's daughter. Like, what about her daughter? What about this? And I was like, well, and I kept wanting to brush. I'm like, forget about her daughter. Like, that's not what I'm trying to write about. By the end of the writing, the daughter became one of the most pivotal characters in the story. So it taught me not to get hung up on one particular storyline. You have to keep yourself open. You have to listen to people who are giving you feedback, and you'll be surprised by what comes out of it in the writing process. And the book that I ended up writing that won awards was not the book I intended on writing, which may not have won awards. So I think the book became award winning through the process of writing it and listening and getting feedback from people and finding the story that was really there. That was incredible. That was an experience I'll never forget.
Yes, for sure. So, do you believe that mistake make you perfect? Not totally perfect, but
I do think mistakes are important. What's that?
yes. Go ahead,
Say
Mr.
that again.
Douglas. Yes. Is it
Oh,
mistake be
yeah, you
perfect?
have to make mistakes as a writer. I way back in 2008, I was going to write a Byzantine story, and I did not know anything about story structure. So my goal was just to write. You know, everyone tells you just write every day, just write every day. So I did, and I ended up with a 500-page novel that really went nowhere, absolutely nowhere. And it was at that time that I told myself it was time to learn a little bit about story structure. What does it mean to set up a story? A beginning, a middle, and an end. How do you structure it? What should I be looking for? How do you do it? You know, how much of it should you plan ahead? You know, all those things. And I got there by making terrible mistakes that took up years. I mean, really. So, but that's part of the journey. So you got to do it.
Yes. Embrace the journey, people. So, how do you balance
Yes.
with the other aspect of your life or aspects of your life?
Like, how do I balance it out or?
Yes.
It's not easy. It's not easy, especially with kids. My kids are my number one priority. So, if there's a face-off, the kids are going to win. My challenge is to trick myself into designing a schedule that forces me to write. And that might mean waking up super early before the kids are up in order to get that writing in. And that's exactly what I've done. So knowing that during the day, my kid's schedule could swoop in and change everything at any moment, or take up an entire weekend for one baseball tournament, waking up extra early to get my writing done, or to stay up extra late, depending on if you're a night owl or an early bird, you know, tricks you in a way. It forces you to get your writing done. And again, if you're taking yourself and your writing seriously, then that's what you got to do. You got to find a way,
Yeah. You have the passion, you make a way, people. What are some themes or topics that you are passionate about exploring in your writing?
I have become more intrigued about like destination writing, where you go away for a weekend. I've started to mess around with that because it's another way of overcoming my particular challenges. So every now and then I'll get like an Airbnb and go away for the weekend. And I'll even have the kids come out to visit briefly, with my wife and kid. They'll come out and they'll say hi, and I'll take a couple hours and play with them and hang out, and then they'll go away. But once they're gone, there's really nothing there to distract you. And it is a fight sometimes to get into the story. But once you get in, you've deep dove, you're in the deep end. So I'm looking at exploring that a little bit more, going away and isolating myself and just like binge writing, for long stretches instead of, the steady pace that I'm used to. So I think you need the steady pace, but I'm more and more curious about the long weekend as an alternative as well.
Yes, it's a long weekend here in Canada.
Oh,
So,
really?
yes, we
Yeah.
have the busy day. So, how is your writing evolved over time?
I think the functionality part of it is the main thing. Because when you're younger, I think you just write a few cool scenes and then you get excited and you read them to your friends, right? And you're like, hey, listen to what I wrote. And they're like, oh, wow, that's great. And you're like, yeah, aren't I just a great writer? But they're not going anywhere. And it's because you've only imagined a few opening shots in your head. And then you kind of fall into a trap of, well, what should happen next? And you fall into a logical trap. Well, then if they're there, then they do this, and then they do this, and then they do this. And if you're boring yourself, then the book is going to be boring. So uncovering functionality helps stop this sort of forced design of each chapter where you're just throwing the next chapter together, and you're following through on that character. And the other one I would say is really focusing on your character. It's easy to get lost in world building. I have a friend who loves world building, but he gets lost in it and he almost never writes anymore. He just loves world building. So it's good. It's very important to world build, but the main thrust of these are going to be your characters. If people like or love even your characters, they will go to the last page of that book, regardless of how long it is. They will go all the way with you. So you really have to think about your characters. And I take that seriously even with my side characters. One of my, like you said, how do you evolve? One of the things I do more late than I did when I was younger is when I bring a side character into a scene, that side character is almost always capable of dominating the scene or my lead character. That character's got some abilities and mastery of the world in some level. So even my side characters, I expect I have a high bar for. I want them to be fully functional, fully capable characters in their own right, to where someone could think to themselves, man, that side character could have their own story. It
Yeah.
just it just enriches every scene if you have fully formed characters like that.
How do you handle feedback or criticism of your work?
I think I do very well because I don't take it personal. So, for example, Theodora, she's a real historical woman. And so I'm writing about a real historical woman. And a lot of the feedback came from women to me, where they would be like, Doug, you could tell that you're a male writer. You're getting distracted in how beautiful she is or how hot she looks. And so I realized, I'm like, man, that is really distracting. That's not really the purpose of this chapter. So the feedback, even if it was harsh, and some of it was like, Doug, you're completely missing the point here. That feedback became absolutely essential into getting my character right. So the only feedback that, and I never get mad about it. That's another key. I never get mad about it. Sometimes people can give you feedback who don't understand your story. You could tell they may have breezed through it and they're just throwing a few thoughts out there and it doesn't sound like they've put a lot of thought into it. I just ignore that. That's not that helpful. But people who take the time to read your story and provide strong feedback, I will always listen to that. And then it's up to me as the writer what to do with it. I don't necessarily change everything that is someone had a problem with, but sometimes they tell you something that you would not have come up with yourself, and you make a vital change to your story or your writing.
Purchase one of my audiobooks. People stand tall, stand together, breaking the chains of bullying. Breaking the chains of bullying, available on Audible, and they are bestsellers. Book 101 Review, Volume 3. This is all about my first season and 100 episodes of my Book 101 review, and of course, my Earth Fever, unraveling climate and our race to restore our balance. And Book
Wow.
Review Volume 2 selected. Again, this is my 100 episodes of my first season of Book 101 review. And of course, Book 101 Review Volume 1, highly recommended. And one of my self-help book, Threads of Existence, Weaving the Tapestry of Life, and Life is Too Short. A journey of discovery, fulfillment, and joy. So please do purchase them, people. Available on Audible and one of the best sellers. So, Mr. Douglas, what are your short-term and long-term goals in writing?
My short-term goal right now is promoting the Heroine's Labyrinth. I want to get the word out on that. It's a new approach to writing and story structure. And also another short-term goal is to finish book 2 of the Byzantine Empress Theodora saga. It's going to be 3 books. I have each book. Well, book 1's written. Book 2, I'm about 40% done writing, and I have the treatment for book 3 already set in place. So promoting the Heroine's Labyrinth is a short-term goal, and finishing Empress Theodora book 2 is a short-term goal. My long-term goal is to complete, at minimum, the Theodora trilogy, and I'm also looking at writing a trilogy about a Byzantine general named Belisarius. And really, if I had my goal, it would be to be the foremost writer of 6th century Byzantine Empire with the richest characters, the most developed Byzantine world put to writing, and educational, where people are so intrigued by the stories that they take it upon themselves to go research what was real and be as excited as I was at discovering this Byzantine world that you might not have heard about in the history books. There's so much there. It's actually an incredible period in history. So that would be a long-term goal. And another long-term goal would be to establish myself as a credible, helpful expert in story structure, specifically as it pertains to the Heroine's Labyrinth, and helping other writers put their stories together using an approach that no one ever thought of before. And the more writers I share it with, the more they get excited, the more I get excited. And I feel like I got a tiger by the tail. And I would love to share it with everybody. I'm sorry, Daniel, the audio is a little scrambled there. I can't hear you.
So, Mr. Douglas, can you
Oh,
please
there we go.
our listeners to support all your books?
I'm sorry,
Yes.
did you ask me a question?
Yes. Can you please invite our listeners to support all your books?
Oh, yes. If you are a writer and you are looking for a way to organize your story or to help you put your story together, please consider the Heroine's Labyrinth, Archetypal Designs in Heroine-Led Fiction. It's an alternative to the hero's journey. It was gleaned entirely from heroine-centric stories, both from mythology to the classics to modern-day films and movies and TV shows, even comic book runs. And although it came from heroine-centric stories, it is not gender exclusive. This can be for male characters or female characters, characters from another world. It does not matter. It's a totally different take on organizing stories, and nobody else has this. And I'm really excited to share it with as many people as possible. And then also, if you love historical fiction, if you love the Byzantine Empire, if you love great historical women in fiction, I encourage you to buy Faraway Bird. It's the early life of Byzantine Empress Theodora. It's her origin story. It follows the historical record very closely. It's an award-winning book, and it's also available on audible.com or anywhere else books are sold.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Douglas because if you support him, more books to come. So Theodora is the Cleopatra of like in Egypt.
Yes.
Okay, that'd be awesome. So, Mr. Douglas, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Daniel. I really appreciate it. And it was just great talking with you.